Good evening, folks. Good to have you back with us again. This is our 11th weekly Zoom interview since we started the series back in January. And tonight, of course, we for the first time we have two people who are going to be working together to present a really spectacular and a unique tour for you in June on Straight's raid through Alabama, and that's Brian Wills and Norm Dasinger, who you see on the screen here. As you all are aware, we're getting a little better with these, and if you have to check off for some reason or another, we will have the video of this interview up on our free YouTube channel. If you haven't registered for that, we got about 150 people or so have signed up for that now, and all that stuff is free, and you can come back and look at these things again. And also, you'll find these interviews will be attached to the registration forms for this, so that if you or somebody you know is interested in going on this program at the end of June, then go ahead and refer them to the website, and they can look at this interview that we're going to conduct tonight. As you all are also aware, this is the Blue and Gray has decided to commence our tours again. The board of directors approved that last week, and we have our first program is going to be at the end of April with Bob Jenkins, who's going to do the first two parts of his Atlanta series, which are Dalton and Resaca, and sites related to that. And then a couple of weeks later, we're going to do Shiloh with Greg Mertz. Then we're hoping that we'll continue to make progress in the immunizations, and that the CDC will loosen some of the restrictions on us so that we can get into our June program, in which we've got Saratoga is first up in Lake George, New York. Then we have a Gettysburg program with Dave Collins, and then we have a Custer to the Little Bighorn, from Bismarck to the Little Bighorn, and then back follows that. And then the last program of June is Brian and Norm doing Straight's raid out of Gadsden, Alabama. And we will shortly post the hotel for that. We already have into the second van for that. And I am expecting that probably we'll see between 10 and 20 people registered for that. So if you find this of interest to you all, I do recommend you can actually register now. So you can find that by going to the website, and you'll be able to register there. And we'll keep you updated as to what's going on. And you will see the restrictions that we have. I won't discuss them right now because I expect they're going to change in the next couple of months. But for right now, there are restrictions that everybody will have to comply with. It's part of the price of being insured and doing things that we have to do. I have done this, and it's become a standard because I was willing to let Karen do this, but she's so modest that she won't self-promote herself, so I'm going to promote her. I've known Karen, who is our host tonight, for a lot of years, and Karen is a researcher par excellence in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and for about 20 years now, she has been working on a singularly unachievable project to digitize all the archives of the Lincoln administration, all 11 or 12 million of them or so. And she has systematically and devoted herself to doing this. And you can see on the screen here some of her website. If you haven't been to her website, go look it out. It's lincolnarchives.org. Look around, you'll see some great things there. The website is entirely free. You'll find things, for example, she did all the trial records of the Indians that were tried and hanged after the Dakota War of 1862. She has up the Lincoln assassination records and things like that. So you'll find a lot of really neat things there if you go there. And most importantly, though, that I'd like to point to you is that man does not live by good intentions alone. Karen is not organized as a nonprofit. It's a lot of inconvenience for her to do so. But if you like what you see, if you support what she's doing, she certainly will accept donations. They're not tax deductible, but it will help her pay the bills and do the things that she has to do so that she can get back and do the things she really loves. So I hope you'll take a look just in this quick scan that she's put in front of you. I hope that's whetted your appetite a bit. As to us, if you're not a member of Blue and Gray, give some thought to it. We've got some neat things going on. We have put up nearly 100 lectures from our archives that are available to active members of the organization. We have a free YouTube channel that has 15 or 16 presentations on it that you can access for nothing. And look at the other things that we're doing. So with all said and done, Blue and Gray is a happening place, and the Lincoln Digital Archives Project is something we heartily endorse and hope that you will take the time to learn about it, and if you can, support it. Sure would appreciate it. Okay, with that, I'm ready to get going, and I'd like to say hi to our two historians, Brian Wills and Norm Dasinger. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Good morning. Good evening.
This is a reunion of sorts. I've known Brian for at least 25 years, and Norm I've known for the better part of 20 years now, and I've found both of them to be extraordinary historians and all around really good guys. So I'd like to thank you for being with us tonight. I'd like to address first question as Brian, this is Kennesaw and Atlanta is a pretty fair transition from Wise, Virginia. Tell us a little bit about your career and how you ended up going from Nathan Bedford Forrest to George Thomas.
Well, the trip was a lot of fun to go on through all these years because I started my interest in history at a very young age. My mother's a teacher, and so I got that bug in me from the earliest days. And she used to sell World Book Encyclopedia and Childcraft, and I would read the Childcraft volumes about great people, and I fell in love with history and George Washington and others, and then sort of you automatically kind of move towards the Civil War figures and Robert E. Lee and so forth. And if you're born in Virginia, you sort of have that connection that way anyway, that drive that way anyway. But my interest in history went from high school to college. I went to the University of Richmond and majored in history, and then went off to work for a few years at the Virginia Baptist Historical Society. And then I ended up going to graduate school at the University of Georgia, and I got 2 degrees in Athens at UGA. And again, history was my interest and forte there. And from then on, it's been a growing and learning exercise. And when you say, how do you go from Forrest to George Thomas, I think you've already kind of hit on the fact that I like to write about people. And the thing is not so much what side they were on or how, their level of participation in the Civil War or a war between the states, or as we like to say, I wrote a book about the Civil War in the movies, Civil War in cinema, that references a movie that referred to the Civil War as a late unpleasantness. And so, the unpleasantness covers a lot of range of people. So I did Thomas, who's a Union general, although born in Virginia, William Dorsey Pender, a North Carolinian who was a Confederate, right, and Forrest, who was, of course, from Middle Tennessee, and then kind of moved around from there. So just one of those things that people catch my attention, although my last book was on unusual circumstances in the war that caused death when it wasn't necessarily intended. It was called Inglorious Passages, Non-Combat Mortality in the Civil War. And so I've stretched out, and you'll probably be interested in this, but my latest project, which I'm trying to get finished with Ted Savas, is a book on Charlton Heston. I always love the movies.
Oh, really?
History. And Charlton Heston is always referred to his public face, and I call it Running the Race. It's tied to Ben-Hur, the public face of Charlton Heston. And I really examined that whole motif of how he created, recreated, and found audiences again and again and again throughout his career and to the end of his life.
That's pretty cool. And your mentor at Georgia was Emory Thomas?
That's correct. Yeah, Emory was my major professor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was very fortunate from the Houston Civil War Roundtable to receive the Frank Vandiver Award of Merit. And I said that was a great irony because of connection. Emory Thomas's major professor was Frank Vandiver. So I consider my grandfather, academic grandfather.
There you have it. Hey, Norm, you're a businessman and an owner of a business, yet you become a real change maker in preservation and in both Georgia and now Alabama. What's your road to that interest?
It's somewhat similar to Brian's. Many years ago, my dad started doing a lot of genealogy, and he wrote some books on our family, different family trees. And in doing that research, he came upon some Union and Confederate ancestors that we had, and had always been a little interested in history. But once he started doing that, and I helped him out. I was in high school or junior high school then. I helped him with the research, and we would go to courthouses and roam around Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama and look for these things, look for these records. You got interested in who those people were, what they were about, where they came from, and then what happened to them as Sergeant Major of the 7th Mississippi Infantry Battalion or a private in the 53rd Georgia. What happened to these guys? And that spurred an interest with me that just, the bug, the hook, whatever you want to call it. And I was taken from that point forward. Got involved in different organizations like the Sons of Confederate Veterans and the Sons of Union Veterans and other organizations that then kind of grew upon that and just became very interested in not only the history, but the organizational part of these different organizations that are in place to try to preserve that history. And then about 1985 or 86, I happened upon this magazine called Blue and Gray Magazine that talked about where this stuff took place. And oh my gosh, now I found out what I really liked, which was I like the history, I like the people, but I like to go where it happened. And that became a mission of mine, and learn about, not just about the Atlanta campaign or the War-Streight raid, but where did Emma Sansom actually help Forrest? Where was that spot? Wouldn't it be neat to go there and see that? Wouldn't it be neat to actually see where the Kentucky Orphan Brigade assaulted the Battle of Dallas? Beyond just learning about it, going there. And from there, then that was the next step. You grow, then you add that into the organizational part of what I was doing. And I went to college. I was a biology education major. I love plants as much as I do history. And so I was a high school biology teacher and high school German teacher and football coach, but also doing this other stuff on the side for fun and for my own pleasure and for promotion of history. And then I got out of the education business after 16 years, took over a business that my father had started when he retired from the education business. And that brought me from Georgia back to Alabama, where I grew up, and have continued to try to promote myself with my own interest in history, and also try to help others also in the same way. So for me, it's been just what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, in a fun way as much as possible.
Well, I'll certainly say that you know, as long as I've known you, from the very first time that you came up and you joined us, and then we came down, we had a meeting down at your place and stuff. I've seen and met a lot of people in the 26, 27 years that I've been doing this. And I can say with complete and full honesty, I've never met a more impactful layman involved in the Civil War community and in the historical community. You're a fair shooter, you're a square shooter. I've heard people think that you're a Southern partisan, only to watch you lead a tour around, and one day we're looking at Forrest and Wilson, and the next day we're looking at Martin Luther King and Viola Liuzzo and talking about the Civil Rights March and stuff. You're a historian and somebody who I really enjoy spending time with, and I appreciate you sharing that insight with us. Brian, Forrest has built a reputation during the Civil War that commanded the attention of the military leadership of the Union armies in the West. How did he build that reputation?
Well, you never, of course, build reputations overnight. And speaking of reputations, Norm has such a superb reputation for the work he does in Alabama. And I just want to commend that as well. He's done great work in Georgia too. So he's just a real hero of preservation and a hero of history. And he reminds me that, and all of us, that we're all historians. It doesn't matter who you are, where you went to school, or the level of education, but we're all historians. And I tell my students, if you've ever come back from something and told a story, you were a historian, telling about the experience and telling about what you witnessed. And the good and the bad of that, of course, is that you know what you saw or you think you saw. And Forrest is very much that way as well, because when you go to study Forrest, you can say, okay, this is a man that only had 6 months of formal education. This is a man who didn't really have a military background. How can he be effective? How can he be, as you used the term for Norm, but how can he be impactful in a war where you have professionals and would-be professionals who want to lead that war in certain directions? And Forrest, of course, built his own personal approach to warfare, just as he had built his personal approach to his private life. He grew up in poor prospects in Middle Tennessee, and he turned out to make a living for himself. Again, he steps into some areas which would make us feel uncomfortable in the 20th and 21st centuries, but they were part of the world at the time, and he used those mechanisms to advance himself. And once the war broke out, he ironically didn't embrace secession and rush off to fight. He took his time, and then when he had more reason to participate in the war, he actually went in as a private. So as a private, he wasn't going to influence much of anybody or intimidate much of anybody. But it wasn't long. He had some connections, and it wasn't long before he rose to lieutenant colonel and then up the scale from there. I think if probably you were picking one engagement that caught the attention of more people than just those who knew him themselves, that had been his superiors, I would pick Murfreesboro, the raid on Murfreesboro, and his ability to use, again, bluff and bluster, all of the tools in his toolkit to accomplish what looked like it might be an impossible task of taking 3 separate pieces and ultimately overcoming all 3 of them and capturing the town, at least for a period of time. Remember, it was a raid, so he didn't plan to stay. He certainly excelled at raids, just as we will see when we get to Straight's raid. He excelled in pursuit of raids. So he wasn't just good at one thing, he was good at a lot of things. But I would say probably Murfreesboro was where he caught the attention began to catch the attention of Northerners as well as Southerners. And by the way, I didn't really mean to leave off my own area today, but I'm the director of a Center for the Study of the Civil War Era and at Kennesaw State University, and we do a lot of programming. I just got through doing a program this weekend, in fact, and on Saturday. And we have a Vince Dooley Leadership Seminar in June that we're excited about. All of that's still virtual, just like we're virtual, but hopefully we'll get back to live activities and in-person activities. We also do tours, so we're similar in that way to Blue and Gray, and we try to do the same thing that Blue and Gray does, take you to the ground. I couldn't agree more with Norm. You got to get out of the books. Now, you got to get in the books. You need to read books. You need to buy some books, but you need to get to the ground. You need to see the ground, and that's where you really see the subtleties, the nuances, the complications, the terrain, and all of the other features that people have to actually deal with when that battle leaves a map, when that campaign leaves a map and goes to the ground.
Norm, you live up in the area. I know you spent a lot of time looking at it, and you know a lot of the importance of Alabama during the Civil War era. But tell us, why a raid across northern Alabama, and what's the Union's objective in conducting it?
All right. The objective is really pretty easy. It's the Western Atlantic Railroad. Now, I'll tell you something about Brian, Lynn. Many years ago, I don't know the year. It had to be about 2003 or 4 or 5. You did a tour, hosted a tour on Forrest and Alabama, Tennessee, all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian was in the van. He was a historian, and I knew Brian to know who the expert he was on Forrest, and to have him in the van for those 3 days, and we drove a lot. I was a driver, and we probably put 500 to 1,000 miles on your van. And to have Brian in the van where I can ask him questions, not just about Forrest at Selma or Forrest at Sulphur Creek Trestle, but to ask him about Forrest as a child, Forrest as an old man, Forrest as how did he think in this situation. It's probably the best, and I've been on a lot of tours, hosting or going on a lot of tours. That's probably the best tour I've ever been on, because you had the absolute expert on Forrest that you could ask anything you wanted to about him and would get an answer. So for this tour to have Brian Wills on it, and I'm just the person going to show you where everything has to do with the tour is, the locations. To have him on the tour, that for anybody that likes Forrest, and I know in the tour business, if you put Sherman or Forrest on the tour, go ahead and start getting the van filled up. And so Forrest fills vans and buses. And to have the man who knows Forrest in the modern era like nobody else on this tour is last time it happened was 2003 or 4. You're not going to have this again probably for another, for a long time. But this raid by Straight objective is the Western and Atlantic Railroad. He is really following up the Andrews Raiders from the year before. They did the same thing, trying to cut that lifeline for the Confederacy between those two big towns. And this is really a second shot at that. First one didn't work out in 1862. This is not going to work out in 1863 either. But it's Abel Straight trying to do that. It's all, when you look at the geography of it and think, now the two armies are in Middle Tennessee, many miles from North Alabama, many miles from Atlanta, or the railroad between Atlanta and Chattanooga. And you're going to have this guy who's going to lead these troops mounted in some form or fashion, mounted across Alabama, all by himself, alone, and he's planning on cutting that railroad. In my opinion, I think it's quite a creative, quite a brave, and quite a gambling raid that he's going to put forth. And Straight does a good job with it. He's an intelligent guy with an objective that if it had worked, I don't know what damage it would have done. Might not have made much difference. But what a risk taker, and what a leader who is going to take these guys really into an area where he's not going to get a lot of support, but he's going to try to do something to make a difference. And I tell people with this raid that if Abel Straight had gone up against somebody other than Forrest, he might have been successful. The problem he runs into is they give him Forrest to take on, and that's going to be a problem. Straight's good. Forrest is better. You can compare it to kind of like a football team. Your football team is good. The coach of the other team has almost as good of players as you do. He's just a better coach. This guy is a 5-star coach. Straight is a 3-star coach. In the end, the 5-star coach, the 5-star player, they're going to beat the 3-star almost every time. And that's what you have here.
Brian, who's Colonel Abel Straight? What's his background? Was he the right guy? In your opinion, was he the right guy for the mission he was assigned?
Like everyone else, of course, the war has a different fate in mind for everybody who participates in it. And I think one of the best statements I ever read about talking about commanding and commanders and leaders in the war was that the war would figure that out. It would figure out who should advance and who should drop back, and who was past their prime or not ever going to be in their prime, and who wasn't. I'll never forget one time I had an argument, a newspaper editorial page argument about the best cavalryman in the Civil War. And of course, I tried to, as a very young person, make my case for Forrest and Stewart and others. And finally, one of the Jeb Stuart people made the comment that Forrest never beat anyone. And I said, well, what was he supposed to do? Lose to a few of them to make them look better. And that just wasn't our style. He wasn't going to lose to a few of them to make them look better. Abel Straight was a very capable, very competent figure. He was an inspirational leader. Now, he was born in New York in the late 1820s, but he'll move west, gets married in his 20s, and moves west with his wife and ends up in Cincinnati for a little while, and then goes off to Indianapolis. And so it's really in Indiana that he settles in before the war. His dad apparently was well-to-do as a farmer. Forrest's father was also a farmer, but not well-to-do. He was a hard scrabble farmer in Middle Tennessee. And so Forrest's background in the sense of farming was about as close as those two came. But Straight got into all kinds of interesting things. He got into writing, he got into the lumbering business and the timber business, and he got into just all kinds of things that were interesting. And of course, in the outbreak of the war, he had connections that helped him move into a position with an Indiana regiment, the 51st, and ends up moving into the leadership role there as colonel. Whereas, again, I told you, Forrest started as a private and had to work his way up, but he also had a powerful friend, Governor Isham Harris, who helped push him up pretty quick as well. So both of them seem to have benefited from friends that were governors, and that's probably not necessarily a bad thing unless your governor is not a particularly good thing, but that's a whole nother ballgame. But Straight was, I think, very much the man with the vision, the desire to do something. And I will say the one thing, and Norm would know this very well, but the one thing that makes the Civil War so unique is there's not one package where everybody in the South is a Confederate. There are plenty of Unionists in the South. Of course, West Virginia is the most obvious place, Western Virginia. But North Georgia had a lot of Unionists, and Northern Alabama had a lot of Unionists. And so it wasn't as if there weren't anyone at all that could have either rendered support or been favorable towards Straight's operations. But Abel Straight has to move on terrain that's very difficult, as we'll see. I mean, we're much better positioned to enjoy it than he did. And even if Forrest weren't on our tail, as he was on Straight's, just the terrain traverse itself and the conditions were different and difficult. And he handled the situation well. We will see where he'll set up ambushes. He does the best he can to keep his men motivated and moving forward. And I think he really was, he did as well as he could do. And I'm totally with Norm in saying that if anyone else had been after him other than Forrest, you maybe flipped a coin.
Mm-hmm.
Harry Tate asked a question while you were talking, Brian, and he wanted to know what the relationship was with Grant and the what was going on in the Vicksburg campaign at the time. Do you have some views or thoughts on that?
Well, of course, you're always trying to see what you can do to make any operation more successful. So as Forrest demonstrates his capabilities, he's going to have efforts made to try to divert or keep him from interfering with more significant operations wherever they happen to be. I think probably one of my favorite, I told you I do a book on the Civil War and cinema. One of my favorite books, or movies rather, was The Horse Soldiers. Well, in The Horse Soldiers, supposedly Forrest is the one who's going to pursue Ben Grierson, played by, of course, John Wayne. And at the end, it's supposed to be Forrest's men who were running Grierson down. Well, number one, they didn't run Grierson down. Number two, he wasn't there. He was with us. He was in northern Alabama. So there were other things that Forrest was doing. I will say, though, if you ever think that cavalry cannot make a difference, look at the West Tennessee raid that Forrest did at the beginning of the year, when he was able to go into West Tennessee and wreck the railroads that would support Ulysses Grant's first major overland operations toward Vicksburg. And then, ironically, because of course Earl Van Dorn had a very checkered career in many ways, including an ending that was very checkered, Earl Van Dorn, by hitting the forward supply base at Holly Springs, does a superb job between the two of them of wrecking what Grant had accumulated and wrecking the rail lines over which Grant would move. And so cavalry in that case really did a strategic function in stopping Grant's first overland push. So there was no question that there was a desire to keep Forrest occupied at whatever time you're looking at. You know, Grenville Dodge was supposed to move out and keep some of Straight's men free to move by keeping Forrest tied up, looking at him. And of course, Forrest figured out fairly quickly what the real threat was, the real operational situation was, and adapted to it very well.
Thanks. Norm, Straight, part of what makes this raid even interesting and in some eyes comical was the selection of horse flesh that Straight engages in here. Can you address that that challenge that Straight faces and why he had to face it?
Well, Straight is so enthusiastic about wanting to do this. It's his idea, and he goes forward to the federal hierarchy with the idea of doing this. That you could have probably had his guys mounted on goats, and he wouldn't have mattered to him. But because the hierarchy in in Rosecrans' army, and to a degree even Grant, because like you said, Grenville Dodge is from Grant's group. They thought it was a decent idea, a decent gamble. That's Rosecrans. He thought it would be okay, but he didn't want to risk any good horses for something that probably wouldn't work and was a big gamble. And so they, the hierarchy, said, "Well, hey, Straight, we like your idea, but would you be willing to use mules instead of horses?" You know, Forrest, if you'd asked him that, he would have said, "You can forget that idea." But Straight was enthusiastic. He wanted to prove to folks that he was who he was, a smart, intelligent, brave leader. And he agreed for the mule idea. And at the beginning of this raid, he is going to have a lot of mules. And they're going to be mules that he has to gather around Nashville. And they're going to have to be transported along with his troops down the Cumberland River, and then up the Tennessee River, and offloaded at Eastport, Mississippi. And he's going to have these mules, and they're going to be a problem from the very start in Nashville. They're going to be a problem once they get offloaded in Eastport, Mississippi. And they're going to be a problem when it comes to getting chased by Forrest, who's not on mules, he's on horses. And that's going to be a problem. Now, as the campaign goes along, and he makes his way across North Alabama, some of those mules are going to be traded for horses. So at the end of this, he won't have as many mules as he had at the beginning. But you're right, Lynn, it does add an interesting variable or flavor to this raid because of the use of mules. But I don't think it bothered Straight that much. He really wanted to do this no matter what he was given, and was probably just glad to be given the green light to make the raid anyway.
Brian, we know history tells us that Forrest took the bait, whether this was Grant putting some bugs in people's ears, or whether it was Straight's initiative and so forth. We know that Forrest goes and grabs for this, and he takes off after Straight's force. In studying this, is there anything about this opportunity that struck you and made the opportunity irresistible to Forrest?
Forrest is one of these people, he doesn't miss many opportunities when they're handed to him. He's like everyone else. I think one of the things that I try to tell my students is that no one knew how things would go, and no one knew dispositions of troops particularly well, whether you're talking about large scale or small scale. They talk about developing the enemy line if you're in a larger scale engagement. And Forrest had to sort things out like everyone else. He was very shrewd about how he gathered his intelligence, gathered his information. I was not afraid to assess and make decisions and then go with the decision that he had made. And so he does have to spend a little time trying to decipher which of the two advances were the most important. Was Straight trying to divert his attention from Dodge, or was Dodge trying to divert his attention from Straight? And once he determined what he thought the most important element was, then he was like a bulldog latching onto it. He would not let go. And again, I say Straight was not a weak figure. He didn't just roll over and say, well, you figured it out, you've got me. He put up a fight, a running fight, a hard fight all the way. And we'll get to see some of the most important actions in this campaign, that are some of which are inflict some real wounds, some real licks on Nathan Bedford Forrest. But a couple things that strike me about Forrest and the way he approached this was he's smart enough, again, to know human nature, and he knew human nature very well, to fight using psychology. And we'll see the best example, of course, at the very end of the campaign when we see what happens. I'm not giving that away. I want you to get on the bus. So we're not giving that away, Norm. But what he does along the way is to send forces out on either flank to try to move forward and cut off the Federal raiders. And again, terrain really makes that difficult, makes that hard to do. It's easy enough to send to look at the map and think, well, this is how we're going to deploy our troops. It's really that sort of constant assault on the rear of the enemy positions as they're established, and then he drives them from point to point to point, that Forrest does what he does and does it effectively. So his flanking ideas, which were fine ideas, and they certainly look good on paper, were not going to bear fruit for him the way the sense of keeping some of his men rested while using others to pursue, constantly keeping the pressure on the opposing force so they could not rest. And the whole thing turned out to play well into Forrest's hands, but it took a powerful effort, a consistent effort, and a constant effort on Forrest's part. Otherwise, he may not have achieved the end that he did.
That's good. Very good.
Thanks. Brian, Norm, you've spent a good deal of time looking at Forrest. I know that because we've talked over many years about this, and you've looked at all of the various and sundry engagements and so forth. In your consideration of Forrest and Straight's raid, do you believe this was a good use of Forrest's men or his time, or do you believe Forrest could have been used better somewhere else, and if so, where?
That's a good question. For Forrest, in his ascendancy to what he would become, this is a great opportunity because, as Brian said, Murfreesboro kind of gets him to a certain position. And in my opinion, this raid starts that trajectory even higher. When you can do what he does here at the end of this campaign, the way he does it and the results that come from it, and you can have that sent back to your superiors and written about in the newspapers, and your troops that fought with you go back and tell others about what you've done, it causes his reputation to just zoom up into the sky. And for his personal resume, for his personal training, for his personal leadership, you couldn't ask for anything any better. Would he have been better to chase Grierson down rather than Straight? Yeah, maybe so. But would that have maybe changed where Forrest would have his track toward what he eventually would become be different? Probably so. So for him personally, this is a positive. For the Confederacy, it's probably not where he should have been for the best use of the talent that he has. But like Brian said, we're looking back at Forrest from this year. We know what Forrest is going to become after the spring of 1863. You can't say that about his superior. You can't say that about Bragg. You can't say that about even Wheeler. You can't say that about people that would be associated with him to say, hey, the best use of him is for this. They don't know what we know about Forrest as he matures and as he grows into a leader. But some of the things he did on this raid, the way he anticipates things almost as if he has been to a military school, almost as if he sees almost a premonition of what he should do beyond even what the learned people would tell him to do. There's a couple of situations at the beginning of this around Florence, Alabama, where he makes a minor, seems almost ridiculous detail of having troops go here rather than there. And to us, we would look at it and go, well, what's the big deal? But it made a difference in the outcome at the beginning of this campaign. And he'll make those decisions throughout April 28th through May 3rd, 1863, where small little, almost insignificant things, you go here rather than go there. Let me send you here. Let me change some things there that to most people would be insignificant. They're going to be important things. And only he's one of those it factors. I tell people Robert E. Lee was 1 in a million. Yeah, you're doggone right, he was 1 in a million. You can't replicate somebody like that. You could say the same thing about Grant, maybe. And Forrest has that it factor. He can just make a decision like a Nick Saban, and I'm an Auburn guy, but you can make it about a Nick Saban. He can just feel how to make the change where you can't. He just has that in him, and he displays that on this campaign, where he makes a decision where other people wouldn't be able to do it. And how does he know to do that? He just knows. He just has it.
Well, Norm, you hit on a very important thing there, and I'm going to draw back on that Saban idea. Georgia should have won a national championship, and Saban figured out how to change just enough to take it away from him. So you can look at it that way. But one of the things you're spot on about the Forrest is that he does the details. He does those little things that work. And the other thing, again, that reading of human nature, he could see Dodge beginning to not act as if he was going to continue and read that accurately. And again, you don't get that in books. You get that from instincts and from just understanding human nature and everything else. And he could see that force is not behaving the way that I need to worry about. Another force is behaving the way I need to worry about.
That's right.
You know, there's a fascination to that too. And I think, Norm, you hit the nail on the head. Oftentimes, the quality of the decisions that are made in independent command and so forth are really dependent upon the people that you're working with and through and about. And Forrest has already sized up Braxton Bragg. He has a sense as to what he's willing to do in the Western Theater and working to support Bragg. One can only imagine how he might have interfaced with John Clifford Pemberton. He never does, and so we don't know. But that could have been equally disastrous if Forrest had brought his personality into that particular military challenge that Pemberton was facing. They may not have been able to work that out at all. So you got to have good material. If you're going to make good bread, you got to have good wheat. And sometimes some of the leadership of the Confederates in the West wasn't terribly good. Brian, the Straits raid is, as we pointed out, it's a long ride. It's you don't appreciate it, and I think it's always been the challenge in doing cavalry in the Civil War tour business and so forth, is because they don't fight big battles and they ride a long time, and their butts get as sore as your butts get in a van.
Yeah.
There are only a few engagements in this. Tell us a little something about them, just briefly, the engagements in Straits raids.
Well, Norm's going to be in the best position to tell you the specifics about the locations, so I'll leave that to him. But he would remind us that, and you're right, that there's not going to be one huge set piece battle that determines the fate of nations. In a cavalry raid, your ability to continue to sort of strike and move is probably as important as anything else. And there are at least two primary points of contact that will be important to the story that we'll talk about at Days Gap Hog Mountain. And then, of course, the end when Forrest reaches that final stage of trying to figure out how to close this out. And we'll have a lot of fascinating stories along the way. But Forrest is one of those people, again, that he's just tenacious. He's a bulldog. He won't let go. And I think probably my favorite stuff is tied to exactly what Norm has already talked about, being from Gadsden and talking about Miss Emma and what we'll be doing with this Miss Emma. I know you've probably got a question related to that, but his ability to again not give up even when things don't look particularly like they're going well. There are going to be some ramifications when some of these ambushes are set. Forrest has to learn from experience not to let that happen again. And in one case, he loses his brother Bill, and apparently Bill was a pretty tough fellow. Forrest said that the only man he was ever afraid of was his brother Bill. Forrest had 29 horses shot out from under him. He killed 30 enemy soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. So I can't imagine what Bill must have been like for Forrest to say he was afraid of his own brother. But that had to be overcome. And then the setbacks that seem to happen when we talk about if you want to talk about one of the more colorful post-Streight raid stories, when they get back to Columbia, Tennessee, and Forrest calls to the carpet, for lack of better terms, one of his subalterns, Andrew Wills Gould. He blames him for losing two artillery pieces in one of these ambushes. And that leads to quite a confrontation between the two of them that leaves Gould mortally wounded and Forrest pretty severely wounded, but not wounded in a way that his life will be endangered, although he thinks for a time that it might be. And Forrest could be just as tough on his own people as he was on opponents. You've mentioned Bragg. It's funny that Bragg actually thought pretty highly of him after Murfreesboro, but it seems to have gone downhill pretty quickly. And of course, we know that Forrest eventually confronts Bragg and says, "You played the part of a scoundrel and are a coward. If you were any part of a man, I would slap your jaws and force you to resent it. You may as well not issue any more orders from me, for I will not obey them. If you ever endeavor to cross my path again, it will be at the peril of your life."
And take that. Hey, Norm, last time we did Straits raid, I was really impressed with the surrender and the manner in which Forrest brought this raid to an end. Tell us how Forrest did that.
Forrest, he has some luck in that, as Brian said, Straits and his men are absolutely as sleep deprived as you could get. They're worn out. They've had this tenacious cavalry commander on their tails for days, who hasn't let them rest. And they're not planning on surrendering on May 3rd, about lunchtime, May 3rd, 1863. They are willing to go a little longer. And Forrest realizes that, and he approaches Streight, or Streight approaches him, and Forrest has about 300 guys left. Straight has almost all his 17, 18, 1900 guys with him. And Forrest knows that if they go one more round, I'm heavily outmanned. I'm not getting any help. And he has to come up with a way to get Straight to give up, not have that last fight. And he uses what, maybe a businessman type of thing, a businessman that tries to bluff, that tries to tell the business he's trying to do with other people, this is a better deal if you'll let me do this, and tries to figure out their weak points and tries to bluff them. He was used to that as a businessman, and he knew how to work on people's kind of weaknesses and how to make deals with them. Forrest, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, but he doggone sure liked to gamble, and he liked to lose a lot of money when he gambled because he wasn't very good at it. But at least he did know how to have the idea of a bluff, and when it comes to cards. And he's going to use that gambling, that businessman type of personality here at the very end of the raid in order to get Straight to not tell his guys, all right, guys, line up one more time. Let's go with this. We beat him at Hog Mountain. We beat him at Days Gap. We almost had him at the Blunt Plantation. We can get him one more time because we know he don't have, we know he's not going to get any more help. What Straight doesn't know at the very end that we know, and that Forrest knew he had about 300 guys, and he knew Straight had about 2,000. Straight didn't know how many men Forrest had, and if Forrest ever let it be known how many guys he had, he knew Straight would have not been into a position where he could have made any kind of deal with him. And luckily for Forrest, Straight is never going to know until after the end of this campaign just how many men Forrest has. And he's going to have to use that. Forrest is going to have to come up with a plan, a bluffing plan in order to make it look like he doesn't have 200 guys. Now, how does he know to do that? And that's what we're going to talk about on this, the very end of this. And the way he does it is just, again, a guy who just has the it factor. How did he know? Did he already have that when he got there that day? Did he already knew what he was going to do? Or did he just come out and go, and in his mind, and go formulate the plan right then and there, standing in front of Abel Straight? I don't know.
I tell my grandkids, by the way, that the best thing you can learn to do is pay attention. And I think Forrest, and I tell that to the students too, but I think Forrest was good at paying attention. He could size up circumstances and situations, and he could see what his eyes would tell him all he needed to know about where he was. And you've hit, again, the nail on the head 100%, that he had been a gambler, and not maybe more successful than you're giving him credit for. He won some, he lost some. Gamblers learn to do that. They win some, they lose some. But when he was sitting across from someone, he could see their tells. He could see what they were showing, if there's any doubt, he would pick up on that. He had that personal radar, and he would pick up on that, and he knew he had you. He knew that he had you. And then it was just a question of how you go about getting it done. And you're absolutely right. It's going to be delightful to have people learn how he did it, but then also learn how he talked about doing it. Forrest was a great storyteller. And you've already fallen a little bit into the Forrest mode, because as you went on, Straight's forces got bigger and Forrest forces got smaller. Yeah. And that would make Nathan Bedford Forrest very happy. Yeah. He would love you, Norm.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I want to hold a question to the very end, but I don't want you to get away from here. Mike Sheriff wants to know about your Vince Dooley event that is coming up. Before we get away from that, I want you to be able to tell folks about that so that those that want to see that will know how to get involved in it. But let me stay with Straight in the Civil War for the time being. What happens to Straight over the remainder of the war and after the war? Anybody know?
Well, Straight's one of the great things. Again, I think it shows you his character. He's going to Libby prison. I don't want to give anything away, but he's going to Libby prison. He may go for reasons we can't explain. He may go for reasons we will explain, but he's going to go, and he's going to end up escaping. with
Yeah.
107 other Union officers from Libby prison. The guy he was tough as nails. And I don't think Forrest was up against someone that, again, just automatically was going to roll over. And then he goes on, of course, in his post-war career, he goes on into some politics as a state senator. He does some more writing. He does a lot of work with lumber again. He kind of comes back to his loves of carpentry and lumber. So he's an interesting guy because he ends up kind of going full circle from his pre-war life to his post-war life. Forrest was kind of like that. He will go from his pre-war life to his post-war life, where he will try to bring his fortune back into being after it had been lost in the course of the war. And gambling remained a part of his life. I guess my favorite gambling story about Forrest in Memphis was where he got in quite a reputation of getting into games. And when he was losing, he would say, "My wife, Mary Ann, is waiting for me at home with her Bible on her knee, and I must go home to her."
Uh,
Losing, he would not let you quit until he had a chance to win back his money. So
sounds
he
like
was
him.
he was a tough fellow, but Forrest was quite a character, quite colorful. But Straight was colorful in his own way.
Lynn, I'll tell you three things about Straight. He goes to Libby prison 6'2", 225 pounds. He gets out of Libby prison 6'2", 225 pounds. That means something went on there at Libby prison with him to tell you what kind of leader he was. He doesn't lose weight. He doesn't suffer like some of the other guys do. Second, if Abel Straight's unusual, his wife Lavinia is about as crazy as they get.
Oh
She
my!
is an interesting lady. She is after the war, and even after Abel dies, she becomes a big spiritualist, and she is quite a character unto her. The men of the 51st Indiana absolutely adore her, but she has some interesting stories that she's going to be able to tell us on our tour too. And the third thing about Straight, I've learned here in Alabama, one of the most famous people is George Wallace. And George Wallace, if he ever met you, he knew and talked to you. The next time he saw you, he would know your name. He would know your wife's name. He would remember about your kids and ask you how they were doing. He had that kind of memory that if he ever saw you, he never forgot you, and he was able to remember everything about you. Straight was the same way. Here in Gadsden, he met one of the business leaders here in town named Colonel Kyle, and just happened to pass by Colonel Kyle here in Gadsden, and Kyle happened to see him later on. Kyle was in the lumber business too here in Northeast Alabama, and Kyle happened to go to Indianapolis after the war, happened to walk down the street and see a sign for Straight's Lumber Company. So he decided, I'll just go in. And he walks in the door, and Abel Straight remembered his name. He remembered where he was from. He remembered his kids. He remembered the last time he had seen him. And they talked for 30 minutes or so about things in Gadsden, Alabama. That gives you an idea of kind of the brain he had. That Brian said he was a leader, and he was a very smart leader, Abel Straight.
Mhm.
Truthfully, didn't know any of that. That's really cool. I think I probably need to spend a little more time learning a little more about Abel Straight. Either one of you, Forrest's combat capabilities diminish as the war goes on. We did Wilson's mounted infantry raid and so forth. Did Forrest and his critter company just get worn out by the length of the war and the constant combat, or in your opinion, did the Federals finally figure out what they needed to do to neutralize this guy at Selma and elsewhere within the raid?
Brian, you do that one. You're better at that
Okay,
one.
well, I can tackle that actually. It's funny. The first time Forrest clashes with Wilson, Wilson gets the worst of it. And I think what you see from Wilson is a willingness and understanding of how to learn from his experiences. So at Selma, he will do to Forrest what Forrest would have done to him had the circumstances been different. Had Forrest had the men and the capability to do to Wilson what Wilson will do to him, he would have done that then. His problem is he didn't have the men, he didn't have the resources. Wilson kept some of the men divided away from each other so that they couldn't unite. And Forrest, I will say another thing about Forrest. We assume he almost always had this prescient knowledge of what's going to happen. He really did not have that kind of knowledge. It wasn't as if he knew this is what's going to happen. He had instincts, he had the ability to read and so forth. No denying that. But he also was shrewd about how he would place people when Norm talked about the details of placing men in certain positions, because then he could watch different avenues of approach. And then he would know when the commitment had been made to move to this point or that, that's when you can concentrate. And he did that so often, time and time again, very effectively. Wilson would not let him do that in the Selma campaign. So, again, I don't think it's that the Yankees figured him out and how to whip him, except that Wilson seems to have done pretty well. But Wilson had a lot more to work with, and Forrest had a lot less to work with. I think one of my favorite books is a book by my friend Jeffrey Wirt, where he talks about the Stonewall Brigade and the Iron Brigade. And the very thing that made both of those so formidable as units was their undoing, because they so bled themselves and decimated themselves that by the end of the war, they were shadows of what they had once been. And so I think he does a superb job of showing how the war simply wore down the very best, and in many ways killed it off, killed off the very best. So I think the Confederacy by 1865 it's got so many things going against it that even Nathan Bedford Forrest can only do so much.
That's good.
Thanks. I'd like to ask this last question as a reflective question, because we've certainly seen an awful lot has gone on in the last couple of years. Brian, you've lived with the general for 30 some odd years or so, maybe a little longer, and you've gone through a lot of maturation as you've learned about other people and so forth. I'm wondering, what do you believe is the most significant action that Forrest has never been forgiven for? And do you all ever see a point in which there may be a fair and open look at Forrest again, or is he just one of those people who is going to be damned for the next 100 years?
I don't know if it'll be 100 years, but the worm has certainly turned on thinking of Forrest in a positive light. If you had looked at World War II in that period, you would actually see Get There First with the Most was used to encourage the war effort on the part of the United States. And Forrest has a relative shot down over Kiel, Germany, the highest ranking U.S. officer in the European theater. Of course, there's a similar situation from a descendant of a Civil War person in the Pacific. But Forrest will ultimately come into, I think, like everybody else, come into these revisions of who he was, what he was doing. And in some cases, that ends up then shifting the focus from some of the combat stories that made him famous, especially in the American South, to some of the social issues that are more problematic. Pre-war, his engagement in the slave trade, his wartime experience at Fort Pillow, and then his post-war experience with the Klan, which he did not, by the way, found him, but he was still a part of it, although he denied that he was ever a part of it. He certainly knew it, and one of the original founders from Pulaski, Tennessee said, when we got big enough, we needed a leader, and we picked Forrest. So Forrest has the sort of three areas of which we would have less toleration in trying to understand him from our perspective. But I think a comment that was made probably before the cameras came on for most people was that you have to judge these people to really be useful. You have to judge these people from the times in which they live. You have to see them in their context, in their framework. That doesn't mean they're not universal rights and wrongs. I get that. Anybody gets that. But there are circumstances in which people lived in times that are just different than we have today. Now, again, a lot of people say, well, we have to learn lessons from history, and history will repeat itself. Well, history never repeats itself. It may have similarities. Somebody once said it rhymes, but it doesn't repeat, because there are times we have similar circumstances or situations, but they're not the same. We can go through any issue that you want to, from immigration to anything else where things were different. There might have been feelings towards immigrants at different times, but they were different immigrants and different ways of expressing those feelings. But Forrest is probably going to have to go a ways, and there'll have to be a time before he comes to be rehabilitated, in the sense that you start to look at him once more as a picture of the whole, not just picking out the parts either you like or the parts that you don't like.
Your comment, Norm, you want to comment on that?
He's exactly right. It's times change, and in our presentism time in history here, where the only thing that matters is what we think right now, and doesn't anything be prior to yesterday doesn't make any difference in the way that we preserve or interpret history. There's going to be casualties in that, and it's going to be more than Forrest, and it has been more than Forrest. And until we kind of let this run its course to some degree, not that you can just sit by and let it just go unmolested, you're going to have a point where it starts to balance itself out, where people aren't so closed-minded and bigoted that they only pick out certain parts of people to judge them on, rather than looking at the whole person. And when you get to that in a society, and I know societies have done that no matter what, and we'll continue to do that forward, but when you can judge people for everything that they have, whether it's me or you or Forrest or Washington or anybody, that's something that we need to cherish in America and not let go of. And there are people out there that know that. There are people that are trying to make it right, to make it that way, where history is bigger than just individual people and individual instances or moments in their lives. Because I certainly wouldn't want people to judge me by certain things in my life that you're not going to be in the future might not be considered very proud and or fit into a particular story that people think are important or not important. And you wouldn't want to do that to these people either. But it is history. You're supposed to study that. You're supposed to make a determination about them. But what frustrates me is making the determination on individual small things rather than the whole picture. And Brian's exactly right.
Well, one thing, Lynn, just to finish this point, that if history makes you uncomfortable, you're onto something, because that means you want to try to understand to the best of your ability why people did what they did, when you might think differently or do things differently if you were, say, projecting yourself on them. So the point is when you go back and you look at history and they do something you don't like, or doesn't make sense, or you don't understand, you're actually on to history. You're right where you need to be. You just need to read more, think more, and try to open your mind to the point that you can say, I can finally figure out what I think makes sense about what these people did, why they did it, and why is a huge, most important point of history that can be done. Why was this done? Why did these things happen? Why did this person act or think as they did? And again, with my students, I tell them, if you've ever done something you didn't know why you did it, how are we going to know 150 years later why you did it? So.
But Brian, that's the hard part of it, is to not take the information that's given to you and try to believe that as it is. The hard part is to take that information and then try to discover more about it so that you can come up with an opinion about a particular event or a person outside the information that you've been fed. And people today don't like to look for that stuff. They'd rather just be spoon-fed or force-fed that information and say, all right, I guess that's the truth, when it may not be.
Well, you just put your fingers on it in terms of work. History is work, if you really want to try to figure it out and understand it. But I spoke not too long ago. I told you our program on Saturday was about, our symposium was on Charlton Heston and his American Screen Wars. And one of the best pieces of advice that he got from one of the directors was at the very beginning of his career. He was in The President's Lady. And the director said, Chuck, you got to understand that you have to treat Jackson as if he doesn't know he's going to be president someday. And he says, I learned that. And from then on, I took that idea for every great person that I played, because you have to say, well, this person doesn't know how things are going to turn out, doesn't know what their role will be one day. So how do I move in the direction of presenting or projecting what they are now and where they're going? And of course, you have to fit that into the issues of screen time and compression and all the rest of the stuff. But the fact that you have to play Jackson as if he doesn't know he's going to be president. You have to play Forrest as if he doesn't know how the war is going to turn out, or what's going to come after the war, or how long he's going to live, or whatever's going to happen.
That's good. Very good.
Well, gentlemen, I promised that I wanted to give Brian an opportunity to make a comment about Vince Dooley and so forth, because Mike Sheriff's been waiting patiently to hear this, and then we're going to make sure that we invite everybody, especially Corky Lowe, to come on and join us on this program on June the 25th through the 27th, which you can get the information at the website. So, Brian, if you'd like to make a comment about Vince Dooley, we'll wrap this thing up.
Sure. Coach Dooley very generously let us borrow his name, but this is not just purely a University of Georgia event. This is a leadership seminar. And we're going to actually look at presidential and military leadership, the sense of how those two have melded from George Washington to Theodore Roosevelt. So it's kind of an unusual thing, because we won't, again, just focus on the Civil War, although a lot of those leaders will be connected to or come out of the American Civil War, whether you're a Garfield or a McKinley, or of course we know Grant, and so forth. So there's going to be a lot of interesting times to study presidential history a little differently than maybe you're used to, or maybe you would have thought about. Some of the presidents have some interesting military connections that you don't necessarily know about or think about when you just know them on the surface. And our event is in June, also on June 12th. It will be in the morning, so we'll try to be done by noon. I'm going to send out links. Lynn, if you'd be kind enough, I'll send a link to you when I get it all set.
Absolutely, please do.
And we'll get that out there. But this is not just for Georgia folks. You can come if you're Auburn, because after all, Vince went to Auburn.
That's right.
He went to Auburn.
Sure.
And our center would love to have you. We'd love to have you participate. Our website can be found. You can just Google or do any search engine with Kennesaw State University. Just put Civil War Center, Kennesaw, and it should pop up there. And we have an events calendar, and we have our programs and other things. And we'd love to have you be a part of that. We are also, like everybody else, trying to find ways to pay the bills, because the university wants our center to be self-sustaining. It does not want to spend a dime to support what we do. So we are dependent on the good generosity and help of people just like Blue and Gray is, and the Lincoln Archives. Everybody's dependent on friends and supporters and donors who will keep us going. And we appreciate that. I know I speak for Lynn and everybody else that how much that means when you help us all out.
You betcha. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. Brian and Norm never disappoints. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I think you gave a $1.25 for $1's worth of time, and I appreciate all the insights, and I know that folks will get a heck of a lot more when we come back and look at this at the end of June. So everybody have a wonderful evening. The next lecture is going to be either Monday or Tuesday night of next week. I expect to be Tuesday night. It'll be the Civil War in Northern Kentucky, and Daryl Smith will be our interviewee. So thank you so much, and good night to everybody.
Well, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much. We have fun in June.
Thanks, guys. Good job.
Thank you,
Great
Lynn.
job.
Thank you. Norm, we look forward to riding with
We'll
you.
have a good time. It's
Yep.
gonna be great.
I'm looking forward to it.
It'll be
I think
fun.
you're gonna have a ball.
Yep. Karen,
We
thanks.
are absolutely.
Karen, thanks for
Thank
doing
you.
another great job. It's always a pleasure.
No problem. See you guys
Thank you very
later.
much. You guys take care.